What is happiness? How do we achieve it? Are attractive people happier? Are rich people happier? Could plastic surgery make you happier? Should we seek the most momentary happiness possible, or is a happy and fulfilled life one that consists of ups and downs over the course of it? These are just a few of the questions that I got to ask Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who is the author of one of my top 3 books of all time, The Happiness Hypothesis. Just before we get into this interview, which I'll play in a minute or two, just a reminder that on February 1st, we begin a scientific study in conjunction with the University of Washington and the University of Florida, where 140 participants are stopping drinking inside of our famous Project 90 Stop Drinking process. We still have a few spots available. If you would like to participate in that scientific study, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/study for all of the details. And there's also a link in the description of this particular episode. Essentially, we will help you stop drinking for 90 days with our expert coaching, and the universities will track your results. This is an opportunity to be part of groundbreaking scientific research, and an opportunity also to get our extraordinary coaching at a massively discounted rate. We're just asking participants to cover a nominal fee to participate, to cover our coaching costs and some administrative costs, but it's at a huge discount as to what our process usually is. And then participants will also, just in addition to getting the coaching, have to answer a few questions from the universities as we go along. There's 2 start groups, February 1st and April 1st, but you have to be enrolled and signed up by February 1st in order to participate. All the details are at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/study. All right. This is an interview with Dr. Jonathan Haidt. This is one of my all-time favorite books. I actually did this interview some years ago. It has stood the test of time. I don't think we mentioned anything about the year in which I recorded the interview. There's nothing that's out of date. It's all relevant today as it was then. And I'm so excited to share this with you because this book really changed how I view many areas of my life and really helped me reduce stress, anxiety, and worry, and really put my whole life into perspective. So let's play the interview now with Jonathan Haidt. Hello again, everyone. James Swanwick here, joining you for another episode. And I am thrilled to have a wonderful guest on the show today. He's the author of a book that just blew my mind. You may have heard me talk about it on the show a couple of times. It's called The Happiness Hypothesis. And if you're watching on the video, I'm just holding it up here. The Happiness Hypothesis, Finding Modern Truth in Ancient Wisdom, written by a professor by the name of Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist and professor of ethical leadership at New York University Stern School of Business. His academic specialization is morality and the moral emotions. He's the author of course, this book, The Happiness Hypothesis, and also The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, which became a New York Times bestseller. He was named one of the top global thinkers by Foreign Policy magazine and one of the top world thinkers by Prospect magazine. And his 3 TED Talks have been viewed more than 3 million times on YouTube. So we've got a heavy hitter here today on the show. Jonathan Haidt, welcome, sir. Great to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, James.
Yeah, so like I said, thank you so much for writing this book. It just blew my mind, some of the concepts in it. Let's do a book review. We're going to review your book and cover some of the main points of it. But essentially, what were you trying to achieve when you wrote this book?
Well, I'm this sort of person who just loves to make connections. That's a great joy for me. And so here I was teaching psychology at the University of Virginia to 350 undergraduates. And I'm trying to go through all the different phenomena that we've got to cover in the course. And that would remind me of something that I read from Confucius or Shakespeare. And I thought, wow, that would be really fun to survey all the ancients. They said so much stuff. If you look at their advice or their ideas about physics and chemistry, they had no clue what they were talking about. They just didn't know.
Yeah.
But when you look at their advice about how to get along with people, how the mind works, there's a lot of wisdom there. So I thought I would try to systemize. I thought I'd put it all together, put it into categories. What are the main things they talked about? And then apply all these ideas that all the research we now have to say where were they right and where were they wrong. So it was just my attempt to sort of address some of the big questions in life, drawing both on my reading in philosophy and history and my knowledge of current psychology.
Yeah, great. So what is happiness? Now, before we get to that question, we're just going to cover what we're going to talk about here in this particular interview. We're going to talk about, obviously what is happiness? How do we get it? The different ways of trying to get it. And a couple of more specific things we're going to talk about is why we should crave at least one traumatic experience in our life, why we actually want to suffer for a time and the benefits of that, as strange as that sounds. If you're listening or watching right now and you have a commute to work, we're going to talk about ways to reduce your stress. Should you live in a big or a small house? Does living in a big house make you happier? Does living in a smaller house make you happier? We're going to talk about goals. Do you actually want to achieve your goals? It sounds strange, doesn't it? Or do you actually just enjoy the process of trying to achieve your goals? What makes you happier? Jonathan's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Will you be happier if you are rich or middle class, or are you poor? Plastic surgery, will it make you happier? If you're an attractive, good-looking person, are you necessarily happier than an unattractive person? Living in a warm climate over a cold climate, will that make you happier? And then we're going to talk about love. Should you be marrying someone you are absolutely head over heels in love with, or should you be choosing a life partner who maybe you're just friendly with, or someone that you could be friendly with for 50 years, and maybe you don't have that crazy, all-encompassing Romeo and Juliet love? So these are some of the things we're going to be talking about, so make sure you stick around. So John, what is happiness? How do we get it? It's a very generic question, but based on what you've researched, is there an all-encompassing area? And if there isn't, what are some of the main ones?
People can report their mood. If you ask people, how are you doing? How are you feeling? People can say that they're doing 7 on a scale of 1 to 7 or 3. And many people think about happiness, particularly in the United States, which is a relatively superficial culture when it comes to the deep issues. So, how are you? Oh, I'm doing great. We think we want to be happy, where happiness is a current feeling. So, and that's one way to look at it, and that is worth studying. Dan Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, used to think that the goal of life should be to maximize the happy moments. If you quantify how happy you are at every time of the day, a good life is one that has the most happy moments. But he's changed his mind on that for a good reason. Because really, when you think about what you want for your life, is it to have the maximum number of happy moments? Or is it to have a life that feels deep, right, meaningful, and satisfying? And if you think about it that way, if you think about life as more of a story, what kind of story do you want to be able to have? Would you rather have a story in which everything is pretty good all the time? Would you rather want to have one with some ups and some downs and some real interest and some drama and some achievements and some setbacks? So I think most of the field of positive psychology comes down more on the side of the ancient Greeks, this concept of eudaimonia, which is translated as well-being, but we think about it more as a life well lived, a life that at the end you would be proud to have lived. So that's the way that I and many researchers think about it.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the right thing to always wanting to be happy, because we don't have that contrast, correct? Like, we want to have a little bit of pain, we want to have a little bit of suffering, we want to have a little bit of struggle. We don't want to be happy all the time. Otherwise, we're just going to be, unhappy, I guess, from being happy all the time.
Well, that's right. We want a sense of connection and meaning. We want our lives to mean something. And so I think that the trend of modern development, the trend of Western civilization, is towards ever more focus on the individual and his or her experiences. And then we say, why does life feel so empty? Maybe I need to join a yoga group or something like that. So I think you can't look at happiness without also looking at a sense of meaning, belonging, and purpose.
Yeah, and there's also 2 big philosophies in life, isn't there? There's Stoicism and then Epicureanism, isn't there? So Stoicism is maybe more sort of moving towards a goal, slow and steady, that drawing pleasure from life's work, whereas an Epicurean might be wanting to find pleasure in the moment. So going off and doing hedonistic things, it might be alcohol or sex or travel or something in the moment, because life is short and you should live life in the now. So have you formed an opinion between Stoicism and Epicureanism?
Well, so my recollection from when I was writing the book, I read some of the Epicurean writings. My recollection is that they're deeper. They were much deeper than we think. So we now think, to be an Epicurean is you love food, you love pleasure. And my recollection is that Epicurus and the Epicureans, while they did love all that stuff, they also really understood the importance of friendship. They also had a deeper, I think the Epicureans really transport very well into modern life. Stoics are really interesting. When we say be stoic, be tough. One thing I learned from reading the ancients is that, man, life used to be unpredictable. There were these times when there would be peace and prosperity, but then, one day the Spartans come sweeping in and they burn everything, or the Mongols, or there's a disease, or the emperor changes his mind about it and kills you. So if you live in a world which is really unpredictable, then either you've got to be tough and stoic, or live for the moment. But we don't live in either of those worlds. We live in a world which actually, those of us, at least in Australia, United States, Western Europe, and increasingly Asia, we live in worlds where you really can plan for the future. So what I found is that some of the darkest wisdom from, say, the Buddhists, the ancient Buddhists, their worldview was really dark, and they were counseling, detach from the world, don't let the world's ups and downs get to you. But I think nowadays, that would not be a good life for us anymore. Nowadays, you want the world's ups and downs to get to you. You want to have ambitions, you want to have goals, and then you want to strive for them. So I think it's helpful for us to read the ancient Buddhists, the Stoics, the Epicureans, but our world is different from their world. And an optimal life today is not exactly the optimum life that any of those philosophers laid out.
So, John, how do you try to live your life? How do you try to be as happy as you can in the moment? And how do you try to be as happy as you can long term over the course of your life?
We often, it's easy to preach something and often harder to live it. Well, what happened with me was when I started writing the book, I was single. I was about 32 or 33. I was an assistant professor at the University of Virginia. I was working all the time. I was never meeting any women. I was very lonely. I was having some anxiety attacks because it looked like I might not get tenure. So that was a tough time in my life. And in that time, I actually would try to apply some of this advice. I tried to meditate. I tried to calm my emotions down. But, sometimes you have to go through some difficult periods to make it through. I worked hard. I actually did get tenure. And right at the time I got tenure, I met a wonderful woman who became my wife. The theme of the book, maybe to jump ahead here, but the theme of the book is that happiness doesn't come from getting what you want. And it doesn't just come from within, from changing your own desires, as the Buddhists or the Stoics would have said. Happiness comes from between. Happiness comes from getting the right relationship between yourself and others, yourself and your work, and yourself and something larger than yourself. And so in my case, I had a really unbalanced life and I wasn't happy for a number of years. And then, bang, everything came together. I had a real between. I had job security. I got some respect at work, and I had a wonderful woman. And then we had children a few years later. So it's hard for me to say what I did. It just, life sometimes, conditions change. And ever since then, my conditions have been very good. What I can say is that recently I've been somewhat stressed at work. I'm just sort of overloaded, just too much work. We all have that. And so I have begun doing this simple exercise that has long been recommended by positive psychologists called the 3 blessings exercise, where at the end of each day, you write down 3 things that went well that day and why. And what that does is, we'll talk about goals a little later, but what that does is, we zoom through our lives. As soon as we complete something, we cross it off or on to the next thing. When you reflect on what went well that day, you realize, actually, wow, I feel like I got nothing done this day, but when I look, actually, I got that done. And I did this nice thing for somebody. And the reason why it worked is because somebody else helped me. We tend to forget all the richness of the connections, the gratitude. We tend to wipe all that stuff out because we're just so busy.
Yes.
So this simple exercise reminds you at the end of each day that you're connected. It helps you strengthen your sense of between. So that's just one little example of something I've begun doing recently. Can't report yet whether it's changed my happiness because I just started last week, but it's a really good one.
Yeah, I've actually downloaded an app called the Gratitude app, I think it is. In fact, I should just check that while I'm talking about it. And every morning now when I wake up, I go to that app and it reminds me. In fact, here it is here. I've got it in my phone. It's called Gratitude Diary. I'll just put it up there. Gratitude Diary. And it asks you to say what you'll give thanks for. So I'll just read out a couple of my examples just to give you a thing. So a couple of days I've said thanks for sleep. And I've written down, I slept 7.5 hours last night and it felt terrific. I read that my grandfather could only sleep 2 hours a night and then 4 hours off when he was in the war. So I was grateful to be able to sleep in a nice bed in a dark room and wake up relatively fresh.
Okay.
And then another one, friends. I wrote down, thank you for my friends Darren and Mary, who are friends of mine here in LA. Great, genuine people. Went for a hike with them today. Thankful to have them as good friends who introduced me to other great people. Mm-hmm. So just a little thing like that I do. And I find that puts me in a good mood as I start the day.
Right. Okay. Let me give you some advice. I wonder if the people who made the app have tested it out in different ways. Mm-hmm. things you do to put yourself in a good mood early, that they'll tend to fade out very quickly.
Mm.
I think mood effects are very, very short-lived. Meaning effects will last longer.
Mm.
So that's the first thing, is you might consider trying it at night. And then it becomes more like the 3 blessings exercise. Try it at night where you reflect back on the day that happened. Make more meaning out of the events of the day. Express your gratitude for the events of the day. So that's 1, try it at night. 2 is always focus on the depth of processing. So that first one you did, when you first said gratitude for sleep, I was thinking, it's kind of superficial. This isn't going to help much. But the way that you wrote it up about your grandfather, so that, process things deeply. Don't just say, I'm grateful for chocolate ice cream, but process things deeply. And especially in ways that foster your relationships to others and a sense of your interdependence or connection to others.
Yeah.
One final piece of advice, research by Sonia Lubomirsky, one of the leading researchers who has studied these sorts of daily exercises, finds that when you assign people to do something every day, it can actually get tedious, and then you don't get as much benefit as if you just do it a couple times a week. So if you find yourself struggling to think of things, then back off a bit. Just do it 3 or 4 times a week. Because the point here is really to change your sense of connection, to change the way you understand your own life.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's move on to some of these things that I talked about. We're talking to John Haidt. You can find him on Twitter at John Haidt. That's JonHaidt. Send him a tweet. Send me a tweet. Say listening to at James Swanwick and at John Haidt. Professor of Business Ethics at NYU Stern and the author of this wonderful book, The Happiness Hypothesis. I would encourage you to grab it on Amazon or wherever you can and read it. It's a terrific book. All right, so one of the things I said we were going to talk about is why we should crave at least one traumatic experience in our life. Why do we actually want to suffer for a time, John? How is this beneficial to us?
So we are a really funny species. Our brains are they have what's called experience expectant development. So we're born with our genes make our brain. But the amazing thing about humans is that we have these gigantic brains that have to get filled out by cultural experience. On the day a horse is born, it knows how to walk. It takes us a long time to learn those things. We don't really know how to be. We learn a lot of that from our culture. A lot of our personality is based on genetic and innate factors, but it kind of has to get unpacked and expanded out. So imagine you got 2 kids. One kid you protect from any sort of trauma. You keep him safe. You don't let him take risks or chances. And he makes it all the way through to age 30 without ever having suffered a broken heart or a broken leg or having been scared for his life. Another kid, you don't take such care with. You let him go out. He gets injured. He gets his heart broken. He gets in trouble. And he makes it to 30. Now, play those kids' lives out going forward. What's going to happen to them? Research by Glenn Elder, a sociologist at the University of North Carolina, found he looked at people at different ages when the Great Depression hit. And what we found is that people who made it to 30 or so and then had the rug pulled out from under them, those people were much more likely to crumble. Whereas people who were young during the Great Depression when it hit and their lives were turned upside down, those people generally flourished, were much more likely to flourish when older. The point is, we have experience expectant development. We need to get toughened up. We need to learn that when you have a setback, it's not the end of the world. You learn what you can do. You get new resources. You tend to strengthen your relationships. So I'm not saying go give your kids a trauma. And there's certain traumas, such as the death of a child or being raped, for which I know of no benefit that comes. I'm not saying anything is bad. But for example, getting cancer when you're between the ages of about 15 and 25 and surviving it, that's one where people tend to come out very, very well. Boy, do they appreciate life more. Their relationships get stronger. One key thing, and this was a theme of our whole talk, the key to almost everything is relationships. Mm-hmm. Things that strengthen your relationships will tend to be good for you. Things that damage your relationships tend to be bad. So if you lose a child, if you are raped, those things tend not to bring out those things, people are often they don't want to talk to you about it. It's so awful. Mm. But if you have cancer, some people will move away, but many people will rally around you. Setbacks at work. You look at almost every great person, they almost always had some major setbacks, many failures. We're just not at our best until we've been challenged and overcome.
Is that maybe why by children who've grown up in a very rich environment with the best that money can buy, great health, trust fund babies, I think is the derogatory term that we might call them. Is that why so many of them have social problems later on in life, or they turn out to be not particularly pleasant people? Is that one of the evidence to suggest that, I guess?
Yes. Well, before I would accept that generalization,
Yeah,
because
it is a generalization. Yeah.
in general, social class correlates with good outcomes. So the richer you are growing up, the better for a
Yes.
variety of reasons. But yes, there is now research. There was an op-ed in the New York Times recently. There is now research on children born to great privilege who are too coddled and who come out fragile. So in general, it's better to have money than not. It's better to raise your kids with good resources. Yeah. But boy, yeah, you really do have to be careful that you don't always step in and solve their problems for them.
Okay, let's talk about stress now. How do we reduce our levels of stress? What I found interesting in the book was you talked about commuting and people who sit in a car and they drive to work, but when they were given the choice of living in a very rich home further away from their work or a smaller home closer to their work, they still chose the bigger home further away from their work. So can you talk a little bit about the stress levels of commuting and that correlation that's going on in the brain and the physical impact it has?
Here, I'll tell you half the field of health psychology in one word: cortisol. So cortisol there are a couple of stress hormones. There's adrenaline, there's good stress, which is if you're on the starting line of a race, you're pumped up, your body is stressed, it's going really heavily physiologically, but that kind of stress is not actually damaging. But then there's the kind of stress where you're worried about something, there's some threat, and it might last a long time. That raises your cortisol levels. Cortisol is a hormone, there's a lot of good things in the body, but our bodies were designed for stressors that come and go. We're under attack by an animal.
Fight or flight, yeah.
And then it shuts off. Modern life, we worry about, we have a project or an exam coming up and we worry about it for weeks. We keep our stress levels high for weeks. So long-term sustained cortisol levels, that's what half of health psychology is. That's bad. How do you shut it off? Well, think about getting to work. If you commute to work in traffic, by the time you get to work, you've already had 30 or 40 minutes of elevated cortisol levels. You're exhausted. You're not at your best. Now, driving can be a lot of fun. If you live in a rural area and the drive is beautiful, that's no problem. It's not that cars are bad. It's that traffic and uncontrollability is bad. I used to ride to work on a bicycle or a motorcycle. I'd arrive at work really happy. Now I walk to work 1 block. I love it. But people should really think about the nature of their commute and what they can do to make it less stressful. So not that mass transit is always better because there are unexpected delays, but making sure you leave enough time so that you're not worried, oh my God, I'm late, or listening to good music or listening to something that passes the time. So just think about the nature of how you can keep stress to very short periods in your life.
So would you live in a $5 million home 5 miles from work, or would you choose the $1 million home 1 block from work? And there was a lot of traffic in between.
Oh, then the one close to work, which is, I'm very lucky to get housing right here at NYU. We're right in the middle of New York City in Greenwich Village. It's much smaller than the house I used to live in Virginia, but man, I love being in the center of everything. Yeah. So again, the point is what matters is relationships, not objective levels of material resource.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that. So, because my next question was, are people happier if they're rich? Are people happier if they're middle class? Are people happier if they're poor and they don't want to be richer? Like, what's the correlation there?
So the history here is interesting. People always assume that the rich were happier. And then in the 80s and 90s, it came out that rich people are only a little happier than middle class people. And the press widely reported this as, once you reach $70,000 a year, additional money doesn't make you happier. That's not exactly true. What happens is if you're poor and you can go up by 20% in income, you'll be happier. And if you're middle class and you can go up by 20% in income, you'll be happier, but not quite as much as the earlier increment. So the curve does flatten out, but it never gets flat. So people who are making $10 million a year on average are happier than people making $1 million a year, but it's not by a lot. It's just, it keeps going up. So more money is always better. But the key thing isn't the amount of money. Again, it's the relationships. So it's, what do people think of you? So winning money in the lottery tends to be a really bad thing. Relationships, nobody respects you. Everybody thinks you owe them. They sue you. They're mad at you. They think you're rich. You should give them. So winning the lottery is bad because it damages relationships. Starting a business, being successful, doing something that everybody recognizes, wow, you're so successful. People respect you. You do something useful. That gives you more prestige, more esteem in the eyes of others. And that's something that really matters to us, and especially to men. Men really, the male mind is really focused on gaining prestige, which ultimately gets women. So for men especially, it's important to be successful. It's important to be respected. So how you make your money is really, really important.
Hi, this is James Swanwick, and we're taking applications for our 90-day and 1-year stop drinking programs. Clients are mostly executives, entrepreneurs, and investors who have tried unsuccessfully and repeatedly to stop drinking but remain stuck in a frustrating cycle of stop-start, stop-start. Our programs are not AA, which has a reported 7% success rate. Our programs are not rehab, which has a reported 6% success rate. Our 90-day and 1-year programs involve a safe, fun, virtual community of high achievers with a process that boasts an incredible 92% success rate of clients reaching at least 90 consecutive days alcohol-free. We use the latest neuroscience and personal development processes to help rewire clients' brains around alcohol and minimize its importance in their lives. We will show you how to powerfully socialize with friends, family, and colleagues, what to say and how to say it so people don't mistakenly think that you're an alcoholic or have a problem, and how to eliminate the temptation of returning to constant drinking so you can finally break the stop-start cycle. To ensure client success, Project 90 can only accept 15 new clients each month. Some of those happy clients include John Keltner from California, who said, "I've lost 10 pounds." Susie Vaughn, a real estate broker in Tennessee, who said, "I've generated 20% more leads." Jessica Gaines-Jarbo from Kentucky, who says, "I've now got joy, focus, presence, and clarity." And Joe Worley from Michigan, who says, "My wife has the real Joe back." If you're an executive, entrepreneur, or investor who's sick of the stop-start cycle and the damaging effects alcohol has on your health, happiness, and family, and you're ready to regain confidence, become more present with your spouse and children, reduce stress, anxiety, and irritability, sleep better, increase focus and productivity, and feel better quickly, you're invited to apply to become a Project 90 client. Applicants can apply for an introductory interview by visiting alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. There's a link in the show notes which you can just click, but that link is alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. Application interviews are limited and are conducted on a first-come, first-served basis. If there are no remaining interview times available, wait a few weeks and try again. Let's get back to the show.
It's interesting you keep coming back to the theme of relationships is key. And there's two chains of thought here, I know. One is that relationships are the most important thing. It's everything. That's how we view ourselves. And then there are those people who say, I don't care what other people think. They're still lovely people. They're amazing people. They're very successful people. But they say, I'm fearless. I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm just going to do it my way and to heck with anyone else. In fact, I always use the example of Angelina Jolie. I interviewed her when I was a Hollywood correspondent, and she came across as just someone fearless. She just doesn't care what other people think. Hugh Jackman's wife, Deborah Lee Furnish, is 14 years older than Hugh Jackman. She's 59, he's 45. And she's not particularly attractive by societal standards in terms of what you would put into a magazine. But Hugh Jackman says, you know what I love about my wife? She just doesn't care what anyone thinks. Like, she doesn't care what anyone thinks. So how do we play that out in our mind? In one sense, you're saying that everyone cares and that the relationships is what makes us happy. Then there are those other people who say, well, I'm successful because I just don't care what other people think.
Yeah. So there's some social psychologists who have actually addressed this question. So in my more recent book, The Righteous Mind, well, here's the hardcover.
Yep.
I review that research in chapter 4 on esteem. We're all obsessed with polls. We're all obsessed with feedback from how people are thinking of us. So Mark Leary is a psychologist at Duke who's looked at this, and it turns out some people say, if you ask them how much do you care what others think of you, some people say, not at all. Others say a lot. And it turns out that what people say about themselves doesn't really predict very much about how they respond to negative feedback from others. So I don't doubt that there are some people some people are totally obsessed. Their lives are ruined by it. They're neurotic. They're anxious. They're fearful. So it's a real variable. And it's quite possible that Angelina Jolie is at one extreme end. So I'm not saying she's wrong to say that about herself. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is if you survey people and ask them how much they care, it turns out we don't really know ourselves very well. It turns out, in general, we're pretty good judges of others. We understand others better than we understand ourselves in many, many cases. With that said, when you are rich and successful, when you have power and fame, you actually don't care as much what other people think, because first of all, they cut you so much slack. You don't have to care. Whereas when you're of lower status or working your way up, or when you're a teenager, you care a hell of a lot. So, it's attractive. It means you're cool. What does it mean to be cool? James Bond is cool because people are shooting at him and he's sipping his martini. He's unreactive. Whereas Woody Allen is the epitome of uncool because, oh my God, I stubbed my toe and what.
Yeah.
There's something to it, but take it with a grain of salt.
Okay, so let's move on to physicality and how we look. Plastic surgery, does that make people happier?
Well, it turns out, I wouldn't have predicted this, but it turns out that it often does. And the key to understanding it is this. So we tend to adapt to most things in our life. So if you get a raise, you're happy, but then you adapt very quickly and there's no further happiness. If you move into a bigger house, you tend to adapt to almost everything in life. Losing a leg, whatever it is, we adapt to it. But if it's something that is causing you shame on a daily basis, that you don't adapt to. So the research shows, just the one study I remember was a study that looked at breast augmentation, but also breast reduction. Found that they both led to long-term gains in happiness for these women, because women are extremely self-conscious, not all, but many women are very self-conscious about their looks. And if your breasts are large, you've been teased some of the time you were 12. And if your breasts are too small, you're self-conscious. You're always trying to dress to make yourself look bigger. It's a chronic worry. So if plastic surgery takes care of something that was causing you shame, it turns out it actually makes you happier permanently. But then square that with the fact that actually attractive people aren't, on average, happier than unattractive people.
Yeah, that was my next question. Are attractive people happier than unattractive people?
The research that I read suggests not much, or often not at all. Because a key thing to keep in mind is the human mind is very good at judging relative levels, not absolute levels. So we do notice changes. We notice changes in anything, and we react to those changes, but then we adapt to them, as I said. We also compare ourselves to others, but who are you comparing yourself to? So if you're very attractive, you start hanging around with the cheerleaders or the jocks in high school. Now you're comparing yourself to them. Whereas if you're only average attractiveness and you're on the track team or the yearbook club or whatever, you're comparing yourself to your peers. So this is why objective factors that you can measure tend to be much less important than we imagine they are. You think that if you're rich and attractive and you live in a sunny climate, you'd be much happier than someone who doesn't have those. But it turns out that it's relationships that dominate. People with good relationships are happier than people who don't, and that's much more important than any other objective feature.
Okay. We're talking to John Haidt. He's the author of The Happiness Hypothesis. If you're watching on the video, here it is. Here's the book cover, The Happiness Hypothesis. Make sure you check it out. If you're listening to this, then just Google The Happiness Hypothesis, Finding Modern Truth and Ancient Wisdom by Jonathan Haidt. You can find him on Twitter at John Haidt. That's JONHAIDT. Just send him a tweet right now. Let him know what you found particularly interesting about this interview so far. All right, I want to get on to this part, which was huge for me. This was fascinating, and I'm still so perplexed by it, John. I don't know what the answer is, and that's to do with love. Okay, this is love, and more specifically, you talked about the difference between passionate love and companionate love. And to take it just a step further before I get you to explain what the difference is, what we're really looking at here is who should we be marrying? Who should we be spending our life with? Who should we be forming romantic relationships with? Do we want to have a 50-year relationship and raise children? If so, should we be choosing a mate who we're absolutely head over heels in love with? The dopamine, the serotonin, the oxytocin's all going crazy in our mind. It's like Romeo and Juliet feeling we're going to die for this person. Or is that only short-lived? And once it drops and that passion drops, we're just going to be like, who is this person? I want out of this relationship. Or should we be going for someone who maybe we're not head over heels in love with? That maybe they're just a friend. Maybe they'd be a great mother, or if you're a woman, maybe they'd just be a great father. And you know you're going to get along okay. And maybe you're going to have a better chance of staying together and having a deeper kind of love. It's a perplexing question. And when you wrote about it in the book, John, I I just have been obsessed with it and been trying. And you had this very interesting graph. Anyway, I'm going to get you to explain it a little bit. So talk about this concept, if you would.
But here's the key thing to keep in mind about love. We are products of evolution, and natural selection shaped our brains with a male-specific pattern and a female-specific pattern. What we need to do to be successful in an evolutionary perspective is find a good mate, impregnate that mate, and have lots of children surviving. And so for men, it's optional whether they commit to that mate or not. And in almost every other species of primate, the males don't. They inseminate the woman, and that's the end of the matter. Human children need male parental investment. Our heads are so giant, our women are incapacitated for a year or two. So women need male investment. And that's part of the game, is can the woman get the man to commit? We have this interesting thing in our heads, this almost button you can push to fall in passionate love. And it can happen in an instant. It can literally happen in a minute or two. It can happen in a second. But what is it? How long does it last? So what I would always do is I'd ask my students, think about all the times you've fallen in love with someone or had a crush on someone. How long did it last? Does it last minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years? And almost everybody agrees it's weeks or months. On average, if you can you'll fall madly in love, but it'll on average just last a couple of months. That's a couple of menstrual cycles. That's how long it takes to get pregnant. So passionate love is not, it didn't evolve to get us into long-term relationships. It evolved to get women pregnant. And so anyone can fall in love with anyone who's sexy. And you can even know at the time, this isn't really, the person I was thinking was right for me, but your mind is, you're totally drugged. And so you say, well, sure, she's uneducated and crude and my friends all hate her, but, screw them. I need to grow. Whatever. You make up a story because you want her sexually, and you will justify why she's right for you. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain point, she'll say something stupid 2 or 3 months later, and bang, the spell wears off. And you say, wow, who is this person? I don't even like her. So passionate love is the greatest drug on earth. I mean, there's a couple of contenders, but it's one of the greatest drugs on earth. And everybody should take it. I am very pro-passionate love. Just don't confuse it with a signal that you should marry someone. It has nothing to do with that. Okay, now let's look at companionate love. Most people have had a dog or a pet. And I remember when I was a kid, I go to summer camp, I missed my dog more than I missed my parents. Like you love this creature that you care for, and it's so gratifying. And that's why so many people have pets. And of course, you do that with your children. You do that with adopted children. It doesn't have to be biological. In the long run, that is what makes life really, really rich. So what I would say is the passionate love is fantastic, but it is neither necessary nor sufficient for a good marriage. And the companionate love is cooler and calmer. It's really nice. It's not fireworks, but it is absolutely necessary for a good marriage. So by all means, the greatest thing, fall madly in love with someone that you then become best friends with. That's the ideal. I'm not saying it's an either or. I'm not saying find someone right for you, whether or not you're madly in love with them, because sex is important. Sex is important for a relationship. About 40% of marriages in the United States break up. It's hard to keep the marriage going. It's hard to keep it passionate. So it really helps if you find the person really sexy. If you find the person sexy, odds are you're going to fall in love with them early on. But do not talk about marriage. Do not even mention the future until it's been 4 or 5 months and the crazy phase is over. And then if you still really like the person and you think, wow, she's quality, she's a good person, she's good for me, whatever, then you can start talking about marriage, and then you got something.
Yeah, we're talking as if the viewer or the listener is a male at the moment. It's the same. Is the strategy or the advice that you give different than if you're a woman in this situation?
A little bit different. So in general, what I said applies. But the thing that women have to be really, really wary of is that men have 2 mating strategies. Men are evolved to follow either the spread your seed far and wide strategy or the be a good dad strategy. And what men often do is, and look at French politicians or any powerful men. You have a wife, you raise some kids, but you have a lot of affairs on the side. Mm-hmm. So men are programmed to be responsive to both. And some women nowadays may just want a string of sexual partners. That's fine. We live in the modern age where they can do that without shame. But many women, or most women, would like to find a partner. Many or most women would like to have children. And boy, is it awful to have children without somebody committed to you. Whether you're gay or straight, you need a partner for raising children. So women need to be really wary of the fact that a man can fall in love with them at the drop of a hat. He will promise faithfulness. He will promise to love them forever. And in 3 months, when the spell is broken, he very well might be gone. Also, a good way to make them go is have sex quickly, because men have the Madonna whore strategies. So men are unconsciously deciding, is she a Madonna who is unreachable, but I will go on this quest for her and I will woo her, and then maybe I will win her, and then I will marry her? Or is she a whore? Is she someone that I can do easily, have fun, and then I'm on to someone else? So the hookup culture is a really good way for women to make men not fall in love with them.
Okay, interesting. So you're not saying that if you are madly in love and passionately in love with someone that you should automatically dismiss them as a long-term mate.
No, of course not. Of course not. No, they're on your short list. You really, you hope it's going to work. What I'm saying is recognize that you're on drugs. You're impaired. You should not be allowed to operate heavy machinery or make life decisions while you're madly in love. It's great. Go fall madly in love. And if it turns out to be a really good person, then you probably have found your mate for life. But you can't know that in the first 3 months.
So how long have you been married, John?
Well, 12 years.
12 years. So how did your relationship pan out with your wife? And did writing the book have anything to do with it? Although you didn't write the book when you met your wife, did you? Or you did?
I wrote the book after.
Yeah. Okay. So how did your relationship pan out? Were you thinking these things at the time? Were you going, strategically, I should do this? Or did you just go with the flow?
No, I thought a lot about it, because I had one long relationship that was very much going with my gut. A metaphor in the book is the mind is divided like a rider on an elephant. And the elephant is all the unconscious, emotional, lusty processes. The rider is the rational control processes, but it's pretty weak. So I'd had one relationship that was really all elephant, and man, the passion, the sex was fantastic. But she wasn't really the right person for me. And then I sort of went to one relationship too much based on the head, like who was really on paper fantastic, but we didn't have the chemistry. And I was kind of burned by that. And I was kind of depressed by having to end that and feeling horribly guilty. And then I met this woman. And at first I didn't fall in love with her. She wasn't at all my type, what I thought was my type physically. And at first, I liked her, but at first I didn't really fall in love with her. We just went out a few times and she kind of pursued me. And then just something clicked, and I saw her. She put on a dinner party. She was so elegant. She was so skillful. I saw her and something clicked, and she looked extra beautiful to me. And it just took a few weeks. But then once the switch clicked, then I fell madly in love. And, and she knew my ideas on love. And, she was kind of mad at me for telling her, well, we're crazy in love, but, in 3 or 4 months, that'll end. And she really hated that. Guys, don't do that. Don't, you're a lot more romantic than men. Don't talk about this stuff to them. But, I was right. And 3 or 4 months later, the crazy phase ended. And I waited a year to propose. I was not going to propose early. I waited a year to propose, and it worked out beautifully.
So likewise, would you say that you don't have to be in passionate love to be able to find a great mate? Or could you find someone who you're just like, as a man, as I'm talking about here, like if he says, oh yeah, this woman's great, I like her, she's awesome, but she's not like amazing, but I could see myself with her for many years, and I could see myself having children with her. I think she'd be a good mother. Is that okay? I mean, it's not sexy, but is that, from a logical point of view, based on your research, actually probably the soundest strategy yet?
No, I would not say it's the soundest strategy.
Okay.
To find your mate sexually attractive is really going to keep your interest, keep you from straying. So no, I would not say that's the optimal strategy by any means. I would say it's a viable strategy. Sometimes men find themselves in a relationship where there's not a lot of passion, but man, they're best friends. So, I think that can work. That is more important than having the passionate love without the companionate. So that could work. As long as you enjoy the sex and you do find her attractive. But, the ideal is you fall madly in love and it turns out to be a person that you have companion love. So I think of it this way. If you take a tree branch and you're going to graft it on, and in a way that's what marriage is. You're sort of, grafting two living organisms together and trying to stick them together. There's a lot of the imagery. So if you take a tree branch, you smooth away the bark, you graft it on. The passionate love is like a set of cables, a rope that holds it together, but it can only last 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, the cables come off, and usually the branch falls right off, and that's the end of it. But in some cases, actually, they did grow together. And once you begin to grow together, then it's right. And then you really could have a lifelong, fabulous marriage.
Yeah, wonderful. We're talking to Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Happiness Hypothesis. You can get him on Twitter at John Haidt, JONHAIDT. I did promise that we'd talk about the benefits of living in a warm climate over a cold climate, or will it actually make you happier? Let's just deal with that before we just sum everything up here. So what have they found in terms of, is it better? Am I going to be happier living in California than living in Minnesota?
No, surprisingly not. Again, what matters is relationships. And so if living in Southern California ends up giving you lots and lots of deep friends, you'll be happier. I think Southern California is not known for giving people lots and lots of close, deep friends. I mean, I like it. There's a lot to be said about it, but there's also a superficiality there. At least the stereotype is. Whereas in Minnesota, you're spending more time indoors. You're spending more time, presumably, with other people indoors. So what really matters is the relationships, not the weather, because we habituate to almost everything. Also, when you are in Minnesota, and you have, boy, is spring fantastic. I mean, spring is, you have a day which is as nice as Southern California is every day, and you get such joy out of it. Whereas in Southern California, every day is like you habituate to it.
Yeah. It reminds me of when I lived in London. It was like 10 months of just dreary weather, and then on about June, July, the sun would come out and everyone would go crazy. It's like all the girls would start wearing their dresses. Everyone would be on heat, and you'd be like, "Oh my God, this is the greatest place in the world to live." And then as soon as summer was over, you're just like, "This place is death. This sucks."
No, that's right. But again, the point is not to have a life with a maximum average level of happiness. Variance is actually good for us. It's interesting. It shakes things up. Now, there is seasonal affective disorder. So some people get more depressed in dark climates. So I'm not saying there are no differences. But, a lot of the things we think will make us happy, like nice weather, being more attractive, those things tend to have little or no effect. Again, it comes down to relationships and also respect from others, which is a form of relationship.
And eating in a group also, I think, raises people's happiness levels, doesn't it?
Yeah, in studies where they beep people every day, you wear a beeper and it beeps, and you say how happy you are at that moment and what you're doing. What they find is, of course, if people are beeped while having sex. I mean, they were happy; they're kind of pissed off at the moment, but people are happy when. But the other big thing is people are almost always happy when they're eating. It's just fun to eat, and especially if you're eating with friends. If you're not just stuffing food in your face, but even stuffing food in your face, people like it. It feels good. But again, the relationships tends to dominate over any sort of physical sensation.
All right. So wonderful stuff there, John. I really appreciate your time. Just to encompass all of this, it really comes down to relationships. We've talked about a few things here. Obviously, we've talked about, the commute and the cortisol levels and moving towards goals. Do we actually want to achieve our goals, or do we actually get more pleasure from the journey and the struggle towards the goals? But you keep coming back to that phrase, relationships, don't you? So is that what we need to take out of happiness?
Well, yes, but let me just expand on it. As I said before, happiness doesn't come from getting what you want. That's very short-lived. It doesn't just come from within, although our personalities and the way we deal with things is important. Happiness comes from between, and that means getting the right relationships in three ways. So one is relationships between yourself and others. That's the most obvious one. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, a love interest. It's friends, it's a network, it's family. So getting yourself embedded in the right way with people, that's one. But the second one, and this is especially true for men, is work. Men in particular have to be generative. Men are really devastated by unemployment. So getting the right relationship with work, a sense that you're using your strengths, that you're doing something useful, and then people therefore respect you or value you for what you are producing. So that's a kind of relationship. Are you embedded in your work, or is it just a means to an end, a means to a paycheck? And then the third is the right relationship between yourself and something larger than yourself. This is not essential. You can have a very happy life just with love and work. But the greatest lives, the lives that seem most clearly flourishing, are people who are doing something. It may be a relationship to God. It may be that you're a scientist or an artist and you're on a lifelong quest. It may be that you're an activist who's pursuing some social reform or some legislative project. We are not just hedonic creatures who want pleasure all the time. We want our lives to mean something. We want to be able to tell a great story about our lives. And so doing something more than just existing day to day, but being involved in something where you make a mark, you make people's lives better, you've invented something, those are the lives that seem from the outside to be the most valuable lives. And to go back to our discussion of eudaimonia earlier, those are the kinds of lives where at the end, you look back on it, you really have a sense of satisfaction about what you've done, how you've lived your lives, the choices you've made. So that's what I mean by relationships.
Well, Jonathan Haidt, it's been so great talking to you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Again, to the viewer, if you're watching this, this is the book, The Happiness Hypothesis. Make sure you grab it. If you're just listening, make sure you Google The Happiness Hypothesis. You can follow John at Twitter at John Haidt, that's JONHAIDT. Send me a tweet as well at James Swanwick, JamesSwanwick. John, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Oh, my pleasure. Let me just add that people can also go to happinesshypothesis.com. There's a lot of materials there about the book and about how to be happy. James, these were wonderful questions. May you and your viewers and listeners all flourish.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it. And to the viewer and listener, I will catch you on the next one.
Hi there, this is James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I would be so grateful if you would leave a review. That will help us climb the rankings and get our show exposed to so many more people who could really benefit from the content. You can do that by going into Apple Podcasts, rating the show, writing a little one-sentence summary, and posting it. That would be so amazing. Thank you. Likewise, if you would like to schedule a 15-minute exploratory call and apply for our Project 90 program, then you can do so by going to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/project90. If you'd like to get the free guide, that is the Alcohol Freedom Formula Guide, you can go to alcoholfreelifestyle.com/guide. Our YouTube channel is at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/YouTube. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at James Swanwick. Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you, and we'll catch you on the next one.